I'm Ed Adams, and this is the Weekly Genealogy Toolkit, the podcast that helps new genealogists get the most out of their research time and avoid the most common pitfalls. There are a lot of mistakes that you can make in genealogy. That's why I've been able to talk for 10 to 15 minutes a week for the last 43 weeks. I've made most of the mistakes that I talk about, and one of the bigger mistakes out there is assuming that everything worth finding is online. I think this mistake was a bit more understandable back when I was getting started because it was the boom years of online genealogy, and it seemed like every month there were 100 million more records available. It seemed like if it wasn't online, it would be soon. Well, I've been doing this for a while now, and despite the fact that Ancestry now has 30 billion records online, it's a bit mind-boggling to say this, but it's true. That is just a drop in the bucket of what exists. For every index collection you see on Ancestry, there are hundreds of thousands or even millions of pages of detailed information that aren't on Ancestry. Maybe not all of it is of significant genealogical value, but it's all there, and I'd bet a paycheck that you can find some really good stuff on your family tree out there. I've already kind of visited this topic before, way back in episode 18, I think it was, but that was really about doing a genealogy road trip planning overall. Today, I want to talk specifically about how to do offline genealogy. The core concepts are the same as online genealogy, but the way that you go about it is often very different. The first major hurdle that most of us have to contend with when doing offline research is coming to grips with the fact that you're going to have to talk to people to get it done. I like to poke fun at how reclusive we've become as the ways of staying connected with others have exploded in quality and availability, but it's true. Try to get a person in their 20s or 30s to answer the phone. It's nearly impossible. And I'm not immune from this either. It's comfortable to sit in my home office with my tea and my dog and click around from website to website looking for sources on my current research subject. I can find a boatload of stuff online, and the only person I ever need to talk to is my wife, who I actually enjoy talking to. Those few moments between tapping in a phone number and hitting the call button can be stressful. Who's going to answer the phone? What am I going to say? Are they going to understand what I'm looking for or what I'm trying to do? Things like laundry, taking out the trash, or helping your kid with their homework all of a sudden creep into the forefront of your mind. And it's easy to say, oh, man, I'm really busy today. I'll call this archive tomorrow. And if you're like me, tomorrow comes and goes, and I have the same excuses. So for me, conquering this phone phobia was really step one. I've gotten to the point now where I kind of get a thrill at the thought of reaching out to a new entity in hopes of tracking down someone who can help me with what I'm trying to do. Every conversation's a little bit different, and I think with the more phone calls I've had with secretaries and clerks and librarians and archivists, I've been kind of able to build a database of possible ways that the conversation's going to go. The good news is, I've done this enough to confidently tell you that the chances are pretty good that you're going to end up contacting someone who's either friendly and helpful or is actually genuinely excited to hear from you. I think many of the kinds of places that you're going to end up going actually enjoy having genealogists around digging through their old stuff. I've often been asked if I found anything good once I was packed up and leaving for the day. I think maybe the worst interpersonal interaction I've ever had doing in-person genealogy was in a small county courthouse in Georgia. The lady working in the deeds office seemed like she'd never seen a genealogist before and demanded that she hover over my shoulder watching every single thing that I did. Kind of made that particular experience unenjoyable, but that's one out of so many that I don't even worry about it. I do want to try that county again though someday, so if I can hit them up on a day where she isn't working, or maybe she's retired now, I don't know, we'll see. With the obligatory social anxiety bit out of the way, let's look at how we actually go about doing in-person genealogy. Just like with online genealogy, there are a wide variety of collections that you can find only in person. They aren't all in archives somewhere, and you might chuckle at some of the places that you're going to end up going to get your hands on some of these things. The first thing that you need to do once you've decided that you're going to leave your desk and hit the road is survey that location for all possible repositories. The main things that you need to be looking for are the county courthouse and probate office. They're sometimes co-located, but often not. You'll want to find local museums and historical societies, as the people here will often be some of the best allies that you're going to have in finding what you're looking for. If they don't have it and it exists, they will probably know where to find it. Additionally, if you've never gone to a museum with research in mind, you're really in for a treat. What you see in a museum is only a fraction of what the museum holds. If you reach out before your trip to the curator and let them know what you're interested in, you'll often be invited to the back rooms or to the annex warehouses where the real cool stuff is kept. I've been treated to personal tours of off-display collections and have even been allowed to touch some really incredible stuff, with gloves when appropriate. You'll want to look for businesses your ancestor may have worked for, and the schools and churches they attended. Also, look for the cemeteries where your ancestors are buried, because although it's kind of cool to go out and visit those spots from an experiential perspective, you can also make some pretty neat discoveries when you're standing there and see who all is buried around them. Didn't know that your great-grandparents had a child who died at 5 years old? Well, you'll find that kind of stuff out at a cemetery. The last places to make sure that you plot on your map before going are genealogical societies and libraries. While often these days genealogical societies may not have a set physical location, you should plan on meeting with some of the members while you're there. And for me, libraries are just the best places for you to begin your journey. They're quiet, filled with local information, and I've said it before, but librarians are some of the most helpful people I've come across in my travels. If I have a dumb question that I'm afraid to ask at the courthouse, I'll often ask at the library first. There are probably some other places that might be useful for you to visit, but none that come right to the top of my mind. But every in-person trip is really unique. So look at the questions that you have and think about where those answers might be. If you're having a hard time thinking of where you need to look, the best place to look is the Family Search Wiki. Aside from that, the next best thing to do is to reach out to local historical and genealogical societies. They'll help. The next thing that you need to do is figure out what each of those locations has and doesn't have. If you're hoping to find employment records, but when you call the company your ancestor worked for, they say that they shred their records older than 10 years, well, no need to waste your time there. Although sometimes you can ask an off-the-wall question like, hey, do you guys have an old closet somewhere that's filled with old stuff and no one's figured out what to do with it? I feel like most companies have that dusty corner. The more traditional research locations like courthouses and libraries will often have listings of their holdings online that you can review. For the rest of them, it's worth calling and asking. While you have them on the phone, make sure you go over some of the important logistical questions like when they're open and what the costs are associated with research, the best place to park, that kind of stuff. But I talk more about that stuff in my other episode that's focused more on the road trip stuff. So go listen to that for more ideas. Things that you should keep your eyes open for when looking at what each location has are things like microfilms, books, manuscript collections, and newspapers. Newspapers.com has something like over 1 billion pages you can see, but that is truly just a teeny tiny fraction of what exists. Its coverage of smaller town newspapers from the South is really abysmal, so if you don't see any papers covering the area that you're interested in online, go hit up the library while you're there. I've also seen them in courthouses, which I think is kind of interesting. Speaking of courthouses, like I said, call ahead to see what they have because each one is a little different. But you're going to primarily be interested in deed books, maps, session minutes, and those sorts of things. If the probate office is co-located, you'll also be looking at probate packets and everything that comes with that. Very little of the totality of these records is available online, even though there are lots that are. When you first get there, it's a good idea to ask for a quick once-over of the facility and the rules if they don't do that for you automatically. You don't want to have to keep coming out of the archive room to ask where the copy machine is or what the rules are about photographing or where the bathrooms are. Learn everything you need to know about the facility up front, and then enjoy your research. Make sure that you build a research plan for each location you plan to visit. Sometimes these places can be a little overwhelming, and if you just let your curiosity take over, you'll probably learn some interesting things, but it may not be what you came there for. I look at these places kind of like my dinner plate. Meat and potatoes first, and then, if time permits, dessert. Keep in mind that your time is likely limited, so try to keep yourself from analyzing any one source too deeply. Find sources that pertain to your ancestor, take a picture with your phone if you can, or take a Xerox copy, make a note in your notebook, and move on. It's a really good idea to annotate every photograph or Xerox you take. In the moment, you know what it is and where it came from, but once you drive 6 hours back home, it's just a lot of paper or photos on your phone album. So it's best to start a new photo album on your phone for the trip, And then for each picture you take, write down the photo number and a short citation. If it's a bridge, then write down photo number 1, historic bridge on the south side of Kings Highway in Centerville, New Jersey. If it's a document, then write down where it came from. Something like photo number 2, Decatur County Deed Book F, page 143. This will better allow you to look at them all in more detail when you get home and have more time. Also, do make note of everything that you find from a collection perspective. If you end up making a follow-up trip, it's good to know that you found that Pistol Toter's book in the back corner and you didn't have time to look at it. While you should be disciplined and focus on the meat and potatoes first, if you have some time left over, I'd recommend that you don't just head out for an early lunch. Look at everything you have time to look at. I remember finding out that some collateral relatives of mine were declared insane and institutionalized. I don't do a ton of collateral research these days, but it was a neat tidbit to learn anyhow. Maybe the last little tip I'll offer you is if you find yourself confused by something, or if you don't understand something, just ask. You may never get to come back to some of these places, and it would really be sad to think that you might have learned more, but you just didn't understand what you were looking at. Not everyone you meet will be all rainbows and kittens, but most of the people that I've met in my genealogical research trips have been super nice. I remember on a recent trip when I was at the courthouse looking at records, the deeds were all referring to a grid system that I didn't have access to. So when they talked about Lot 393, District 21, that was great, but I had no idea where that was. So I asked the woman who had given me the tour of the archive room, and she happily took me over to another part of the courthouse, where I spoke to another woman who pulled out some old county maps that were broken into districts and lots. She even made a copy for me on a large plotter, so I have a one-to-one recreation of that map for my records. It enabled me to look at all those deeds and get a pretty precise location for each property. Then it allowed me to drive out to each of those locations to have a look. It was a pretty special experience that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't asked. Along those same lines, I understand that based on physical ability, not everyone may be able to go visit the locations that they would like to do in-person research in. Your best friends are genealogical societies. You'll probably need to be prepared to pay a little bit of money, but there are usually several members of a local society who regularly visit local archives to help out-of-town genealogists. They're the experts at the local records, and they can usually find things pretty quickly. If I can inspire you to do some offline genealogical research, I'll consider this whole project a success. There's not much in this hobby that compares to getting your hands on an original source that you were able to track down without Google, Family Search, or Ancestry.com. That's where the real discoveries are made. If you end up going on a research trip, please send me some photos on Twitter at the WGT Pod. If you're not a Twitterer, I also have a Facebook page for the podcast, which you can also hit me up on. I love hearing about your successes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.